Hello, boys and girls. I'm your Peter Pan storyteller.
This is the story of The Last Starfighter.
This is the story of Gremlins.
This is the story of Tron.
This is the story of Raiders of the Lost Ark.
This is the story of The Empire Strikes Back.
You can read along with me in your book.
You can follow the story along with me.
Every time you hear this sound,
Turn the pages when you hear this sound.
You will know it is time to turn the page when you hear the computer sound like this.
Let's begin now.
Hey kids, welcome back to When You Hear This Sound, brought to you by the Space Monkey X Audio Workshop. This is your host, Rob Lamley. Recently, the first prequel movie in the Star Wars saga, The Phantom Menace, turned 25 years old. Personally, the prequels don't really do much for me, but seeing The Phantom Menace in the news means Star Wars has been on my mind a lot lately. So it seemed like a good time to kick off a series of episodes that I've been wanting to do for quite some time, the read-along record books of Star Wars. However, there is a twist. These are not the record books for the original films. I have those records, and I'm sure a lot of you did too, so I'm not going to bother with those unless I get a lot of requests for them. The records I'll be presenting in this series are stories that would now be considered part of the Star Wars Legends lineup that was created in 2014 after the Disney buyout of Lucasfilms. The Legends are essentially any stories that were told outside of the theatrical films, so books, comic books, video games, cartoons, and these records that Disney didn't want to be beholden to moving forward with the franchise. And just because they're not canon, doesn't mean they're not fun. Buena Vista Records, an imprint of the Disney Records Group label, produced a couple of these Star Wars adventures under the banner of Star Wars The Further Adventures in 1983. The one we'll be listening to today is called Droid World, which is an adaptation of issue number 47 of the Marvel Comics Star Wars comic book that ran from 1977 until 1986. Issue number 47 of Star Wars was published in 1981 and was written by Archie Goodwin, with pencils by Carmine Infantino, and features cover art by Frank Miller. Archie Goodwin started his comic book career in the 1960s working for Warren Publishing, primarily writing and editing for horror anthologies like Creepy and Eerie, as well as the war magazine Blazing Combat. Eventually, Goodwin moved on to King Features Syndicate, where he worked on comic strips like Secret Agent X. He would simultaneously work for DC and Marvel in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, mostly writing war comics like GI Combat and Our Fighting Forces, but also had an influential stint on the early issues of Iron Man. He's perhaps best known for co-creating Luke Cage, Marvel's first black superhero with his own comic, along with artist John Romita. When Marvel licensed Star Wars for a comic book in 1977, they initially released a 6-issue adaptation of the film, which sold incredibly well. Goodwin took over writing duties for the ongoing series in 1978 and was the primary author until 1985. During this time, he wrote the comic adaptations of both Star Wars sequels, as well as for films like Blade Runner, Alien, and Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Unfortunately, Goodwin died at the age of 60 in 1998 after a long battle with cancer. Goodwin's artist for many issues of the Star Wars comic was Carmine Infantino. Infantino got his start in comic books during the 1940s, working on titles like The Human Torch and Black Canary, a character he created in 1947. Infantino would go on to illustrate the Silver Age adventures of The Flash, Green Lantern, and the Justice Society of America. He would later create Barbara Gordon, aka Batgirl, and co-created the supernatural superhero Deadman, both in 1967. He was eventually promoted to art director at DC and is responsible for getting the legendary Jack Kirby to work for DC in 1970. By the mid-70s, Infantino was freelancing for Marvel and worked on quite a few issues of the Star Wars comic between 1978 and 1982. Infantino continued to work into the 1990s before retiring. He passed away in 2013 at the age of 87. Frank Miller got his start working in comics in the late 1970s. He freelanced with DC and Marvel for a number of years before finally settling in at Marvel as a cover artist and sometimes penciler. His most influential work was on the dying Daredevil comic book, which he took over art for in 1979. By 1981, Miller had taken on both art and writing for the series and reworked the character to become the brooding hero of Hell's Kitchen that we all know and love today. From there, Miller's resume is littered with influential comics like Sin City, 300, Batman Year One, and one of the defining texts of modern comic books, The Dark Knight Returns. He's still making comic books today, but he's also tried his hand at directing with films like Sin City, A Dame to Kill For, and The Spirit. While the read-along record book for Droid World might have been based on the work of these comic book legends, the artwork for the book is not lifted directly from the comic. However, that doesn't mean it's not impressive. According to Wikipedia, the artwork for the book was handled by Dick Foes, who does a great job with all the minute details of R2-D2, C-3PO, and a bevy of other droids featured in the story. His interpretation of Mark Hamill as Luke is pretty solid too. As usual, I've scanned in the record book, and you can find it in the show notes over at spacemonkeyx.net. And with that, let's get to the record. Here is Droid World from the series Star Wars The Further Adventures, released by Buena Vista Records in 1983. Enjoy.
This is the story of Droid World. You can read along with me in your book. You will know it is time to turn the page when you hear R2-D2 beep like this. Let's begin now. Young Commander Luke Skywalker stood in the rebel ship's loading dock. The wreckage of a menacing war machine towered above him.
An Imperial warbot! So, Major, this is what you had to face in your last battle with the Empire.
The Major pointed to the giant mechanical claws and powerful laser guns.
Believe me, it was no picnic. A full readout of this damaged warbot would really give us an edge in future combat.
Luke turned to his droid companions.
R2, plug into the warbot and try to get us a readout.
C-3PO watched as R2-D2 cautiously approached the war machine.
Oh, R2, don't be such a worrywart. There's no danger here.
As R2-D2 plugged in, the warbot began shaking violently. Sparks flew everywhere, and R2 was knocked over backwards. Luke gazed at the smoldering warbot.
Oh no, its insides are all melted down. We'll never get a readout from that mess.
The Major shook his head.
No, we have one alternative, but it might be risky. There's an electronics genius named Cligson who could help us. He lives all alone on a place called Droid World. But the man is a bit strange. Downright weird, if you ask me.
Luke grinned.
Don't worry, Major. We'll get you the readout.
Luke, R2-D2, and C-3PO blasted off for Droid World with the warbot aboard. While cruising in deep space, Luke turned to C-3PO.
This Cligson fella makes me nervous. No one has ever seen him before. Pretty strange.
Look, Master Luke, something is on our scanners.
Luke stared at a giant space station that loomed in the distance.
Wow, that's it. Droid World. Only a mechanical genius could have built a ship like that out of space salvage.
C-3PO watched as one of the Droid World cannons aimed at them and fired.
Oh, that came wickedly close, Master Luke.
Don't worry, 3PO. It was only a warning shot.
A voice boomed over the radio.
Turn back, intruder, or I'll blast you out of space. This is Cligson, and I don't want any dealings with you human life forms. I'm a cyborg, half machine, half man. I surround myself with nothing but robots.
But Captain Cligson, it's your sympathy to droids that brought us here. We have a damaged warbot that only you can fix.
Ah, I like a challenge. All right, I'll do it. But I have two rules in my world. First, that no human set foot on my planet. And second, anything I repair, I keep.
Luke turned to his droids.
If I were to send you two aboard with the warbot, R2 could record everything Cligson does. At the very least, we'll end up with the Major's readout.
R2-D2, C-3PO, and the crippled warbot soon found themselves in the docking bay of Droid World. C-3PO was amazed to find every model of droid imaginable busy at work.
Oh, look, R2. Isn't this delightful? We're with our own kind now.
They were quickly transported to a massive examining chamber. The warbot was hoisted up behind a huge computerized scanner that flashed a picture of the war machine's insides. C-3PO nudged his friend.
There's our readout, R2. I hope you're recording this.
Just look at that cheap Imperial workmanship.
C-3PO spun around to find Cligson on a video screen pointing at the warbot.
This piece of trash isn't even worth repairing. Send in ZX3.
Cligson, second in command, a towering crimson droid, marched into the chamber.
Shall I have the warbot dumped into the melting pit, sir?
Yes, ZX3. And remove the restraining bolts from these rebel droids. They will be free of their master to join us here in Droid World.
C-3PO was stunned.
But, sir, we love Master Luke. How could we ever think of abandoning him?
Droids, happy with a human master? I've never seen such devotion. ZX3, bring them to me. I want to examine these two firsthand.
As ZX3 marched them to Cligson's door, C-3PO was baffled.
Excuse me, sir, but aren't you an Imperial droid?
Yes, but I was rejected as unfit. Cligson reconditioned me. Now get inside, you two. I must deal with that warbot.
R2-D2 sensed something strange and decided to follow the Imperial droid. Instead of taking the warbot to the melting pit, ZX3 moved it to a secret workshop. R2-D2 watched from a concealed balcony as ZX3 supervised his droid work crew.
Get to work repairing this warbot. Cligson was a fool to think I would melt it down. He won't stand a chance against me when I have this war machine working again.
R2-D2 whistled softly. ZX3 spun around.
What was that? Guard, it's that the rebel droid is spying on us. Blow him to pieces.
R2-D2 sped away as laser blasts exploded around him. R2-D2 scurried to Cligson's room. He burst in, beeping furiously to C-3PO.
Calm down, R2, before you short-circuit. What? ZX3 is taking over the ship. Are you certain?
Cligson shook his head.
I've suspected this revolution for some time, but I needed proof. Now it looks as though we must fight. We must move quickly. Follow me.
They rushed to the emergency exit. The door opened. There stood ZX3.
Going somewhere, Cligson? How about a trip to another galaxy?
ZX3's mighty laser gun fired. Cligson was blasted to pieces. ZX3's fellow traitors poured into the room with their newly rebuilt warbot. C-3PO and R2-D2 backed away.
This looks like trouble, R2. Perhaps we can reason with the brutes. Then again, perhaps not.
ZX3 stepped over the smoldering remains of his former master.
Droid World is mine. I was sent here by the Empire to betray Cligson and to take command of the space station. And no rebel droids are going to stand in my way.
ZX3 signaled to an attack squad, which aimed their guns.
Shoot those droids!
But R2-D2 quickly sprayed the area with a whoosh of his fire extinguisher. And the pair dashed through the clouds, escaping into the hallway. They raced down the corridor. ZX3 thundered.
Droid Tank 1, go after them!
C-3PO turned to see a massive tank roaring toward them.
Quick, R2! They're catching up!
He stumbled around a corner and came to an abrupt halt.
Oh no! This is a dead end! We've reached the melting pit.
Flames leapt up from the blazing inferno. C-3PO watched in horror as the tank raced closer.
This is the end, R2. We're doomed.
The two droids toppled over the edge.
Oh!
But they didn't fall. Two electromagnets caught them in mid-air and lifted them to safety. But the tank was advancing too fast to stop. It plunged into the fiery pit. R2-D2 and C-3PO were raised to a platform above the pit. Much to their surprise, they found that the man operating the controls was Cligson. For once in his life, C-3PO was speechless. Cligson grinned.
You aren't seeing a ghost, my friends. It was a robot duplicate that ZX3 destroyed, not me. I had to protect myself from him. It took you 2 rebel droids to expose the depths of his imperial corruption.
C-3PO was worried.
But, sir, what will you do? ZX3 has a huge army of traitorous droids under his command.
I have been preparing for this day. I have built my own gigantic warbot, which at this very moment is fighting ZX3's troops. Come, we must get down to the battle.
Droid World shook from the force of the brutal war that raged in every corner of the space station. Soon, the fierce combat had ceased. Walls were scorched. Droids were hacked to pieces. Cligson stumbled through the wreckage.
I have won, but at what price? My world is in ruins. Look at this terrible waste. Half the population is destroyed. My friends have slaughtered one another. R2 and 3PO, you are free to go. You are fortunate you have a home to return to.
The 2 droids arrived back at their scout ship. Luke smiled proudly.
You both did a fine job. R2, the readout you recorded will really help in future battles with those Imperial warbots. But I can't help but feel sorry for Cligson. He loved his droids, yet he was forced to destroy so many of them.
R2-D2 beeped softly. C-3PO nodded.
You're right, R2. The Empire will soon be back to try and destroy Cligson again.
Suddenly, Droid World's powerful engines fired up and propelled the gigantic ship far into deep space. Luke smiled.
If the Empire can't find him, they can't destroy him. Maybe Cligson will find peace after all.
Thanks for stopping by the show today. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. You can head over to spacemonkeyx.net for pictures, links, and additional information about this episode, and check out some of the other podcasts presented by the Space Monkey X Audio Workshop. This has been your host, Rob Lamley. Thanks for listening to When You Hear This Sound, the podcast dedicated to the weird and wonderful world of read-along record books and storybook vinyl. I'll see y'all next time.